Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Halloween Haunted Heck Hound Month continues with all new Dogman stories. Ooh!
The day before Halloween, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. Some people I know have a fear of Halloween, or at least an aversion to it. Me? I love Halloween, but I've got a deadly fear of the day before Halloween. And it's all because of the Dogman. Back in the early 80s, my wife, who I will call Martha, and I had just bought our own home in a nice suburban neighborhood in New Jersey. We were getting ready to start our own family, but none of our 3 kids were around yet. It would be almost a year and a half before that phase of our lives began. Back then, we were newlyweds and celebrating our first Halloween in our own house. We had noticed how much the neighbors seemed to get into the whole decorating thing, so we spent a little time and effort ourselves trying to make our house look scary, but not too scary. Martha talked me into also decorating the rear of the house, and her idea, I have to admit, was kind of ahead of its time. She has a bit of Halloween genius in her, to be honest. Anyway, her idea was that we stuff clothes with pillows and make them look like dead zombies or whatever, then dangle them off the roof in various places in the back. This way we could make trick-or-treating at our house a bit more of an event. We put signs up in the front of the house suggesting that treats were to be had in the back, and we had the side of the house lined with humorous tombstones. Then you'd have to pass the zombies hanging off the roof and eventually be rewarded with candy. On your way out, you'd pass our spooky decorations on the opposite side of the house. Considering we threw it together in about a week, it wasn't too shabby. But anyway, like I was saying, this is not a story about Halloween. This is a story about the day before Halloween. That was the day on which my wife noticed that the bodies on the roof had gotten messed up due to weather or birds or something, and they were at risk of falling down. She wanted me to go up and adjust them so that it would be safe for kids to walk under them the following night. It was already starting to get a little dark out, so I rushed a bit to get the ladder and make this happen while I could still see what I was doing. Okay, so I was up on top of my ladder, leaning over the roof, fixing imaginary zombies, when I heard a sound behind me, like some kind of a really large animal. I turned around, but already much of the yard was in shadow, and a chill ran through me. Whatever was making that noise was hiding in the darkness. Was it someone trying to trick me for Halloween? I wondered, but it sounded too much like a real animal for me to believe that idea. We actually had installed lights for Halloween, but I had neglected to turn them on before climbing the ladder. In my rush to get the job done quickly, I had placed myself into a bit of a predicament. I saw the shadow move, and I went right into thinking maybe that's what it was, a real shadow person. I don't even think I had read about them yet at that point. I got myself pretty scared. I decided I had to climb down the ladder even though I might be backing up towards something very dangerous to me. I naturally felt safer up high, but I was balanced on a precariously placed ladder, and I was anything but safe. I definitely had to descend, but I couldn't make my feet do anything. Every time I was about to move, I would hear another sound from the bushes, or I would see a shadow moving again out of the corner of my eye. There really is something to be said about seeing the world entirely differently when we're afraid. It's become something I work on with my therapist ever since that night, but at the time, I wasn't aware how much of this I was doing to myself. I mean, yes, I was in an unsafe place, but rather than behaving rationally and making carefully thought-out decisions as to my next move, I was cowering with my knees knocking together on top of a ladder. I looked at the fake pillow zombie I was holding onto, and I thought how I might soon be a real version of that thing. Then I heard a sound that made me gasp and almost lose my balance. Something was coming out of those shadows. Whether it was a shadow person, or a living creature, or a human, I was about to find out. But what I saw was something from the none of the above checkbox. It was something that I had never heard of or thought about before. It was what is now commonly called a Dogman. But in 1980, I don't think that thing would have been called anything. I don't know if anyone ever saw something like this that far back. I suppose you would know better than I would, but certainly it was not something that had ever been on In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. This was not a Bigfoot. This was not a Nessie. This was not a space alien. This was a hairy, upright, walking, dog-like humanoid. It reminded me of a caveman from a kid's TV show, except for the dog head, which was absolutely the freakiest thing you can ever imagine. I've never been able to describe it adequately. The mouth moved so unnaturally, but I don't mean I thought it was a costume. I thought it was a real thing, with a very unnaturally moving mouth. So now, I forced myself to start to descend the ladder in my mind. I watched as my feet did not obey. Then it was too late, as the dog was at the bottom of the ladder. This thing did not run with its arms pumping at its side like we do. It sort of ran with its hands out in front, like an evil character in an old silent movie. It sort of lurked more than it walked. Everything about it seemed sinister, ridiculously and cartoonishly sinister. It ran toward the ladder, and I braced myself, holding on to both it and the side of the house, ready for when the dog beast tried to shake us both loose. Except that isn't what happened. The Dogman grabbed a rung or two of the ladder with its hands, and I do mean hands, not paws, and the ladder shook. But then, rather than shaking the ladder more, the Dogman started climbing up. Fast. I hadn't expected that. So this was not a normal dog that someone trained to walk on its hind legs. This was some sort of monster. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it fast. Was I going to jump off the ladder and try to land safely beyond the Dogman? If I didn't jump away far enough, he might grab me right out of the air or hurt me with his long claws. Another option would be to climb up on the roof, which is what I found myself doing before I could finish the thought. I raced up to the top of the roof and looked behind me. The dog-headed thing was about to join me up there. Almost without thinking, I ran down the front side of the roof, meaning to jump off the edge onto a pile of pillow zombies we had on the front lawn. Unfortunately, I forgot about the string of orange lights I had previously strung across the roof, and I tripped as I was jumping. I missed the pillows and landed on top of a pumpkin man it had taken a day and a half to carve. The sound of this alerted my wife to run up to the front of the house. Feeling unhurt but terrified, I ran inside, pulling her behind me and locking the door. The second the lock clicked, she asked me what happened, and I suddenly felt all the injuries that adrenaline had prevented me from feeling until I got inside. I had a few bad bruises, but I had nothing to complain about considering I had tripped and fallen off a roof. I was too distracted by the pain to be able to explain very clearly what I'd just been through, though. I told her to stay inside and give me a minute to figure out how to explain. So Martha relented, but fate did not. In the next instant, something large banged into the side of our house. It felt like a linebacker ran full force into it. My wife and I were so freaked out, we ran upstairs and stayed in bed the rest of the night. We were too afraid to go downstairs for dinner, so we ended up eating a tin of cookies that a relative had given us. The next morning, I got up early and drove to a mall to get an outdoor lighting system. I wanted to be able to floodlight any area of our property and to be able to control the lights from inside. I had it set up and working just as kids showed up that night for trick-or-treat. Once I had the lights, I felt safe again on our property, and neither of us ever saw the Dogman again. None of my kids who grew up in that house ever told me about seeing it either. So I think that whatever that thing was, my first assessment of it hadn't been entirely incorrect. It really was a being of shadow in some ways. So I'm not afraid of Halloween, because at our house, Halloween is a brightly lit, fun affair where we get to interact with our neighbors of every age. But the night before Halloween, that's the night that always gives me the willies. And it's all because of Dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
A Dogman in the Bennington Triangle, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. This happened some 10 or 12 years ago. I was hiking with a former friend on the Glastonbury Mountain Trail, the Appalachian Trail, I think. We had visited the ghost town up there, which had people in it. I found that sort of disappointing, living humans instead of ghosts. But as we hiked out of there, trying to get out of the park before dark, my former buddy started telling me really creepy stories about people who disappeared in that area. I don't know if David Paulides had started writing yet by that point, but these were those kinds of stories. The guy started telling me that the area is called the Bennington Triangle and that it's like the Bermuda Triangle. And he told me some other story about how there's a boulder that traps people in a vortex, and there's a giant Bigfoot that squashes people for fun. And I had to ask him to please stop. I told him he could tell me this stuff some other time when we were far away from that place, but all I wanted to hear right then was how soon could we be back in the car driving away. So now he got me skittish, and every bush that moved or sound I heard was a giant Bigfoot coming to step on me, you know? And I was really annoyed at my so-called friend for putting me in this state too. So we made it back to this fork in the road where there's a shelter, and we sat there to rest and drink some water before heading back the rest of the way. I couldn't relax. I was convinced I was being watched, but I was telling myself that it was all just ideas that the other guy put in my head, you know? But still, I couldn't relax. So the next thing you know, just like a jump scare in a movie where the monster jumps out at you, you know? This monster, I swear it jumped right out at us. It was like us resting, drinking water, then us being screamed at by a big hairy man with this dog-like face. I used to call it a Bigfoot in the first year or so after this happened, but it had floppy dog ears on the side of its head and a mouth and a nose that looked more like a dog than an ape or a human. But the eyes looked like there was a soul behind them, just not a soul that cared much if we lived or died. The two of us took off running back down the path toward my car. This thing walked after us, but every time I would look over my shoulder, it seemed just about as far behind as before, or sometimes even like it was gaining on us. And yes, it was walking on its hind legs, nonchalantly, like it was out for a stroll or something. It looked large, but it didn't look large enough to be strolling at the same speed that adult male humans can run. I may have been experiencing some sort of Oz effect, or maybe I was just kind of in a state of shock, but that's what it seemed like I was seeing. Maybe it dropped to all fours and ran whenever I wasn't looking, then rose back to its hind legs and strolled when I looked, but I never saw it running on all fours. I never saw it running, period. It seemed really like it had an evil intention on its mind. It was very unkempt, and its fur was straggly and long and nasty. I don't really know how to describe it other than that. It had the worst qualities of a dog and the worst qualities of a human. It gave me the heebie-jeebies when I saw it, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it to this day. So, we made it to the car, and I sped out of there. I don't remember seeing it once we got to the parking lot, but I probably wasn't looking behind me. My friend and I started arguing the second we hit the highway, and our friendship was already over. I couldn't forgive him for joking around about that stuff that happened in that area. I felt almost like he conjured that monster, like he brought it upon us. I mean, that thing was a real animal and it could have done us a lot of harm, but in another sense, I'm certain it had a paranormal aspect and that he drew it toward us somehow through his attitude. Plus, some things about it just didn't seem to make sense, like how it was able to keep up with us while not seeming to be walking that fast. It was definitely the most mysterious and the most frightening thing that ever happened to me. And that's my story, to the best of my recollection, about the time I saw a Dogman in the Bennington Triangle.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
Come back for more scary stories.